In 1974, the Los Angeles Lakers were a playoff-bound team who did a lot of things well. With that being said, this group was known to make a lot of mistakes on a nightly basis, as they led that season in turnovers per game. No night was more sloppy than on February 15, 1974, in a regular season matchup against the Seattle Supersonics. On this night, the Lakers turned the ball over a whopping 43 times, which is actually the second most in a game in NBA history. Now here's the crazy part. Despite turning over the ball 43 times, the Lakers won the game. And they didn't just win it either, it was a blowout, with a final score of 112-96. The main reasons the Lakers were able to win this game is because they were way more efficient from the field than the Sonics, and they dominated the boards, significantly out-rebounding Seattle throughout the game. Imagine being the coach of the Sonics, and your team finds a way to lose this game despite the fact that the opposing team turned the ball over 43 times. I think that would be enough to make you pull your hair out. There have been many physical final series over the years, but since the 1980s, the most fouls committed by a team over a 6-game series was the Dallas Mavericks in 2006 and by the Indiana Pacers in 2000. Both of those teams had one thing in common. They were both trying to contain the diesel, Shaquille O'Neal. There have been many explosive scorers throughout the league's history, but there are few players who could score in bunches while remaining extremely efficient. For example, Tracy McGrady had just 8 games in his career where he scored at least 40 points while shooting at least 60% from the field. Impressively, Kobe had 23 of those games, and well beyond that is Michael Jordan, who had 70 games where he scored at least 40 points on at least 60% shooting from the field. To put that in perspective, throughout his career, LeBron James has a total of 69 games where he scored at least 40 points. And that's in total, regardless of efficiency, which means that Michael Jordan has more 40-point games of at least 60% efficiency than LeBron James has 40-point games in total. That is one efficiently explosive scorer, to say the least. To championship contending teams, the regular season is often viewed as a time for fine-tuning and chemistry building before the playoff stretch. Well, apparently, this past season's Golden State Warriors didn't even need it. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green are often recognized as the 3 best players on the Warriors roster, and throughout the entirety of this past regular season, those 3 players were all together on the court for a total of just 11 minutes. They didn't even spend a full quarter on the court together before the playoffs started. It's even crazier than that though. Due to injuries, not only did the 3 stars only play 11 minutes together this past regular season, but in the past 3 regular seasons combined, they only played a total of 11 minutes together. When you consider how little time they had to work on their chemistry, it really does add another level of respect to their 2022 championship run. Winning the NBA's MVP award is a difficult thing to do, but far more difficult than that is winning the league MVP while playing all 82 games during the regular season. No one has done that for nearly a decade and a half. The last player to do it was the Mamba, Kobe Bryant, in the 07-08 season. Throughout the years, there have been quite a few players with a short temper, which has cost their teams many points due to all of their technical fouls. With that being said, here's the list of the top 10 players with the most technical fouls in NBA history. Not a ton of surprises on the list. What is interesting though is that 7 out of these 10 players actually played at the power forward position. Do you think that's just a coincidence, or is there some specific reason for it? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. By the way it's glamorized and how often we've all seen the clip, you would think that Michael Jordan was the first player to dunk from the free throw line in a professional dunk contest. Well, although some of you already know this fact, some others may not. It was actually Dr. J, Julius Erving, who was the first player to dunk from the free throw line in a professional dunk contest. It was the ABA's dunk contest in 1976, which, interestingly enough, took place during halftime of the 1976 ABA All-Star Game. Imagine today's modern dunk contests taking place during halftime of the All-Star Game. Not sure if I would prefer that, but that would certainly make for an exciting break. Given how much the Lakers sucked the last couple years, the 2020 championship seems like quite the distant memory, which is why I think many people forget just how dominant that team was throughout the season. And one fact that really illustrates that is this one. Throughout the regular season and the playoffs, the 2020 Lakers had the lead at the end of 3 quarters on 57 different occasions, and the Lakers ended up winning the game all 57 times. They literally never blew a lead throughout the entire season and postseason. They're the only team in league history to never blow a lead in the 4th quarter. There have been a lot of long and dramatic finishes, but one game specifically required more overtimes than any other game of NBA history. It took place long before the popularity of the game exploded, and unfortunately, we have no available footage of this game, at least that I could find. It was in 1951 between the Indiana Olympians and the Rochester Royals. The close battle went for a whopping total of 6 overtimes. The crazy thing is, as lengthy and as close as that game was, it was also incredibly low scoring, as the Olympians won the game 75-73. In the entirety of the 2nd and 4th overtime, neither team scored. And before you think it was because both teams were bad, the Royals actually went on to win the NBA championship that season. Being a dominant offensive player is hard to do, and so is being dominant defensively. But being dominant on both ends of the court simultaneously is especially difficult. In the last 15 years, no player has averaged at least 30 points per game while making the NBA's first team all-defense. The last player to do that was the dynamic two-way player Kobe Bryant in 2007. The player who most recently did it before that was again Kobe Bryant in 2006, and before that, Kobe Bryant in 2003. Goes to show just how rare of a talent the Mamba truly was. If you think you're having a bad day, let me tell you about the day that this guy once had. This is James Ray, a 6'8" power forward who played 3 seasons for the Denver Nuggets, and once upon a time, he was the 5th overall pick in the 1980 NBA draft. Well, on December 9th, 1982, in a regular season matchup against the Washington Bullets, James had a really bad game. On the night, he scored 0 points, he had 0 rebounds, and he dished out 0 assists. But he did have 6 turnovers. The guy might as well have been wearing a Bullets jersey. But here's the best part. He achieved his 6 turnovers in only 4 minutes of playing time. Again, his stat line was 0, 0, 0, and 6 turnovers in only 4 minutes of action. How this guy kept a roster spot after this performance is honestly beyond me. It's a simple rule in the NBA. If you get 6 personal fouls, you're disqualified from the game. Usually. In 2014, the league had to make an exception and enforce a little-known rule. During a regular season match with the Cleveland Cavaliers, the struggling and injury-laden Lakers only had 8 players to suit up for the game. With just over 3 minutes left in the 4th quarter, the Lakers' Robert Sacre received his 6th personal foul, which meant that under normal circumstances, he would be disqualified from the game. The thing is, the Lakers' Chris Kaman had already fouled out, and their other role players, Nick Young and Jordan Farmar, had sustained in-game injuries that sent them to the locker room. That means that the Lakers only had 5 available players before Sacre's 6th foul. If he had been disqualified for his 6th, the Lakers would have only had 4 players, which is too few to have on the court. Well, according to the NBA rulebook, in this situation, if a team lacks a replacement player, said player shall remain in the game and shall be charged with a personal foul and a team foul. Even though Robert Sacre received his 6th foul, hypothetically, he could have received 106 fouls and he still would have remained in the game. Seems like an interesting exploit that could have been put to use during the Hack-a-Shaq era. There are blockbuster trades, there are 3-team deals, and then there's whatever the hell happened in 2005. It was the largest trade in NBA history, centered around quality pieces like Jason Williams and Antoine Walker. In total, 5 teams were involved and 13 players. On the screen is the list of the teams and players. Sometimes it seems nearly impossible for just 2 teams to agree upon terms, but somehow all 5 managed to make it work on this one. I can only imagine the amount of phone calls and hours that went into a deal like this. Steph Curry is really good at making 3-point shots. In fact, he's the greatest to ever do it. Ben Simmons, on the other hand, not so much. So the question is, if Ben Simmons was determined to break Steph's 3-point record at all cost, just how long would he have to play in order to do it? Well, the short answer is a really long time. But to be more specific, he would have to play roughly 171,000 games, around 2,500 seasons, and he would break the record around the year 45-14. So keep it up, Ben. Just remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. One of Russell's greatest friends, and throughout his career, one of his greatest rivals, was the legendary center Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt and Bill had a legendary rivalry for the ages, as the Giants clashed on a regular basis, as they both attempted to assert their dominance over the league. One of the reasons their rivalry is so legendary is because of how many times these two competitors battled it out. Some of the other greatest rivalries of NBA history would be Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird, Michael Jordan versus Isaiah Thomas, LeBron James versus Steph Curry, Shaquille O'Neal versus Kobe Bryant, and Kevin Durant versus Russell Westbrook. But what's crazy is that all of these other great rivalries combined still don't have as many games played against each other as Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain had by themselves, as the two battled it out a total of 143 times throughout their careers. Bill was never known to be an explosive scorer, but he did impact the game in numerous other ways, primarily with his rebounding, defense, and passing. With that being said, in the history of the league, there have only been 9 times where a player has averaged less than 20 points per game and still won the league MVP. Astonishingly, Bill Russell has 5 of those specific MVPs, which is more than the rest of league history altogether. Speaking of Bill's non-offensive impact, many people often consider him as the greatest defensive player to ever live. But unfortunately, many of our modern-day defensive statistics didn't exist during his career. But one of the ones we do have are his defensive win shares. He didn't just dominate this stat, but based on how much he owned it, the stat might as well be named after him. Bill played a total of 13 seasons in the NBA, and incredibly, he led the league in defensive win shares in 11 of those seasons. Second place on the all-time list doesn't even have half as many seasons as Russell did, which was George Mikan and Tim Duncan, who led the league 5 times apiece. The oldest player in the history of the league was an astonishing 45 years old. But even crazier than that is the fact that the oldest rookie to ever play was also 45 years old. They were the same player. Nicholas J. Hickey, more commonly referred to as Nat Hickey, was the head coach of the Providence Steamrollers in 1948. The thing is, his team was awful, with a losing record of only 4-25. In a desperate attempt to help his squad, Hickey activated himself for 2 games, but it was all in vain as he shot over 6 in those games. The Steamrollers went on to lose both games and finished the season with a 6-42 record. He retired as a player just 2 days before his 46th birthday. Tracy McGrady scored arguably the easiest basket in the history of the game. It came on opening night of the 07-08 season against the Los Angeles Lakers. If you want to know how rough things were for Kobe before Pau Gasol showed up, then look no further than this clip. The ball is deflected by Derek Fisher, which is then up for grabs between Kwame Brown and Luke Walton, but somehow Luke and Kwame managed to bobble it into the Rockets' basket. Despite the fact that Los Angeles tipped it in, it counted as 2 points for Houston, and based on the NBA's rules, the bucket is credited to the nearest Houston player to the basket, which was Tracy McGrady, who was standing a step inside of the three-point line 20 feet away from the basket, and he didn't even touch the ball on that possession. Getting buckets doesn't get much easier than that. If your team ends up getting the first overall pick, you're probably going to be a very excited basketball fan. But history tells us that you might want to temper those expectations a bit, as first overall picks are a bit more of a crapshoot than you might think. In the history of the league, there have been 76 first overall picks, and surprisingly, only 45 of those have gone on to be NBA All-Stars. Furthermore, only 29 of those picks have ended up making at least 3 All-Star teams. And probably the most damning stat of them all is the fact that only 11 out of 76 first overall picks ended up winning a championship with the team that drafted them. I think this tells us 3 things. 1, evaluating talent is hard. 2, injuries can happen regardless of your talent. And 3, it's difficult to retain a franchise player when free agency arrives. So again, it's okay to be happy when you land that pick, but you might want to be somewhat cautious as well. Recently in the NBA playoffs, Draymond Green became the center of attention for things that go beyond basketball. People argued about whether or not it was intentional, but regardless of the heart behind it, the fact remains that Draymond Green stepped on the chest of Domantas Sabonis in Game 2 of the first round. Here's what's crazy. Believe it or not, Draymond Green is not the first high-profile power forward to step on the chest of a center in the first round of the playoffs. Charles Barkley actually did it first, which was in the first round of the 1993 playoffs against the Lakers. Admittedly, Draymond's was more of a stomp, while Barkley's was more of a love tap. With that being said, Vlade Divac did everything he could to make it look just as bad. Barkley was hit with a flagrant foul for the move, but regardless, Phoenix would go on to win that series. It's hard to dominate the game of basketball, but it's something else entirely to do it throughout the regular season, offensively and defensively, and on the game's biggest stage, the NBA Finals. Michael Jordan is the only player in NBA history to win an MVP, a scoring title, first team All-Defense, an NBA championship, and a Finals MVP, all in the same season. And, oh yeah, almost forgot to mention that he did this 4 times. Magic Johnson had an iconic rookie season that everyone continuously praises, but it didn't start off with sunshine and rainbows, as few people know that Magic got absolutely torched on his debut game in the NBA. It was on October 12, 1979, on opening night against the San Diego Clippers. Offensively, Magic had a fantastic debut game, displaying his flashy playmaking while pouring in 26 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, and 4 blocks on 48% shooting. What Magic was defending, though, was the 6'2" shooting guard World B. Free, who was just beginning his career year. Magic could do little to contain him, as Free gave him a brutal welcome to the league, as he dropped 46 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and 7 steals on 65% shooting. Fortunately for Magic, he had some help, and when the game was on the line, it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar who hit the game-winning buzzer beater to seal the contest for Los Angeles. Speaking of a Laker hitting buzzer beaters, many people view Kobe Bryant as one of the most clutch players the game has ever seen, but no season was more clutch from him than the 09-10 season. The Mamba was on a mission to repeat as champion, and throughout the course of the regular season, he hit a total of 7 game-winning shots. Thanks to his efforts, the Lakers finished with the first seed in the Western Conference, which gave them home court advantage throughout the West. But if Kobe had missed those same 7 shots, the Lakers would have instead finished as the 8th seed in the Western Conference. If that's not a clutch contribution for your team, then I don't know what is. Kevin Durant is the greatest horse player in the history of the NBA. Well, at the very least, he's won the competition more than anyone else. Some of you may have not known that this was actually a thing, but the NBA officially held 4 different horse competitions throughout their history. One in 1978, in 2009 and 2010, and then again in 2020. Paul Westphal was the competition's first winner, defeating the likes of Pistol Pete Maravich, Kevin Greavy, and Maurice Lucas. KD won in 2009, defeating OJ Mayo and ISO Joe Johnson. In 2010, he repeated, beating Rajon Rondo and Omri Caspi. And finally, in 2020, Mike Conley won. I always thought it was a fun competition, but it may seem a bit boring to the casual fan. Do you guys think this competition should make a return? Let me know in the comments below. Reggie Miller and Kobe Bryant had a lot of battles, most famously in the 2000 NBA Finals. But did you know that they got into not just a battle, but an actual fight? It took place on March 1st, 2002. Remember the Zion Williamson dunk that had everyone up in their feelings? Well, there's been numerous examples of opposing players getting upset because the winning team was running up the score. That's essentially what happened here between Kobe and Reggie, as the Mamba launched this 3-pointer as the shot clock was expiring. Reggie obviously didn't like this and had some choice words for Bryant, and before you know it, the two were tackling each other over the scorer's table. It took a while to get it all broken up. When you look at the replay, you can see that Miller said something that Kobe just couldn't forgive, as it was the Lakers star who threw the first punch. Both players ended up receiving a 2-game suspension. What's kind of interesting is that Reggie is probably the only player who can claim that he got into a fight with both Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. In terms of physicality, the league isn't what it used to be. The NBA presented a much more violent product back in the 1980s, and for the most part, that was a pretty widely accepted fact by both the league office and by the referees. Nothing really proves that point better than this fact. Bill Laimbeer is recognized by many people, including yours truly, as the dirtiest player in NBA history, as he was easily the most violent and physically assertive player on the notorious Bad Boy Pistons. He was constantly sneaking in cheap shots, hitting players excessively hard, and often appeared as if he was trying to outright hurt the opposing player. But here's the details that sum up how different the league was in the 80s. Despite egregiously dirty plays like this, and this, among numerous others, Laimbeer was never suspended and actually managed to get the 5th longest streak of games played in league history, with a total of 685. All this dirtiness and absurdity, yet no suspensions. Finally, that streak ended as the league decided to suspend him for just 1 game when he got into this fight and punched Cleveland's Brad Daugherty in the face. This whole thing makes you wonder just how much Laimbeer would be getting suspended if he played in the modern NBA. Anthony Davis's bones are made out of graham crackers. We all know this. He isn't even 30 years old yet, and the guy has missed 219 regular season games. Then there's an Iron Man like John Stockton, who missed a grand total of 22 games in his 19 years in the NBA. So this got me thinking. Based on the rate in which John Stockton missed games, how long would he have had to have played in order to miss more games than Anthony Davis? In short, 10 times longer than he actually played in the NBA. In order to miss as many games as Anthony Davis has, John Stockton would have had to have played 190 seasons in the NBA. He would have missed 220 games and would have retired at the young age of 211 years old. Is this a more positive stat about Stockton or a more negative one about Davis? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As many of you know, the game of basketball was invented by Dr. James Naismith in 1891. When Naismith created the game, one of the things he quickly introduced was his list of the 13 rules of basketball. These are the rules listed on the screen. To me, some of the more interesting ones are rules like number 3, which prohibits a player from running with the basketball. The other one that's crazy is Rule 13, which basically states that if a game is tied at the end of regulation, overtime will be decided in a sudden death fashion, meaning that the first team that scores in overtime wins. Obviously, that model was not sustainable, and the game has come a long way since then. Most of you probably know this, but if there's 0.3 of a second or less left on the clock, the ball cannot be caught and shot within that time and have the basket count. The ball must be simply tapped in that situation in order for the basket to count. But do you know why that rule was put into effect? It all goes back to January 15, 1990, in a regular season matchup between the New York Knicks and the Chicago Bulls. The game was tied at 106 with only 0.1 of a second remaining, and New York was inbounding the ball. Chicago was positioning themselves to defend an alley-oop pass to Patrick Ewing, but the Knicks went with something else entirely. They inbounded the ball to the open Trent Tucker, who quickly heaved the ball high into the air. The refs counted the basket, and the Knicks won the game. The Bulls coach Phil Jackson was irate after the game and said in a post-game interview that it wasn't physically possible for Tucker to catch and release that shot within 0.1 of a second. At the conclusion of the regular season, the league office immediately instated the Trent Tucker rule, which is a rule that still stands to this day, where a player cannot catch and shoot the ball with 0.3 of a second or less. Flopping in the game of basketball is more common than ever before, but with that being said, the art of flopping goes as far back as the 1960s. Former Boston Celtic and 7-time champion Frank Ramsey made it a regular part of his game. It was something he personally admitted to as he spoke about his flopping tendencies from an article in Sports Illustrated that was published in 1963. Not only was Ramsey referred to as the master of deception, but he talked about how he was often booed and heckled by fans for his obvious acting. Given the fact that Ramsey wasn't really a superstar, and given the fact that he played basketball in the 1960s, unfortunately, there is very little footage available displaying his flopping tendencies. Although it would be nearly impossible to claim that he was the first ever player to attempt the flop, it's certainly a fact to claim that Ramsey was one of the earliest floppers of basketball history. Kobe Bryant is one of the most explosive scorers that the game has ever seen, as he could pour in a tremendous amount of points in a short period of time. No fact may better prove that point than this one. Up until recently, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the NBA's all-time leading scorer, with close to 40,000 points. His career high happened in 1971, when he exploded on the Boston Celtics for 55 points. As impressive as that is, the Mamba scored 55 points in a single half, which he did in the 81-point game against Toronto in 2006. As we all know, the NBA All-Star Game has become an obnoxiously high-scoring affair, but it hasn't always been that way. There have been 148 All-Star teams throughout the history of the NBA, and in only 11 of those instances did a team fail to score at least 100 points. But it is worth mentioning that since 1974, every single All-Star team has scored over 100 points. The lowest scoring NBA All-Star game was in 1953, with a final score of the West 79, the East 75. George Mikan was the game's MVP, but even he didn't have a pretty performance. Both teams shot below 40% from the field, the West 35.4% and the East 37.9%. Now, would you rather have an All-Star game where each team scored around 75 points, or where each team scored nearly 200 points? Let me know below. There have been many instances in NBA history where one conference was much stronger and much more stacked than the other. One of those instances was in the era of the late 2000s, where the West far outweighed the East. In the history of the NBA, only 2 teams have finished as an 8th seed and won at least 50 games. They were the 07-08 Denver Nuggets and the 09-10 Oklahoma City Thunder. Despite being stronger than your typical 8th-seeded teams, both of those squads were eliminated by Kobe Bryant and the Los Angeles Lakers. Speaking of which, there's strong competition, and then there's what these teams had to go against. Only 3 teams in NBA history have eliminated 4 50-win teams in one postseason run. The Houston Rockets did it in 1995, then the Lakers did it in 2001, and then the Lakers did it again in 2010. As far as players go, Kobe Bryant, Derek Fisher, and Robert Horry are the only ones who have accomplished this feat twice. Chris Paul is one of the greatest point guards of all time. Everyone should agree with that statement. But so far in his career, Paul has achieved something that even other legendary point guards never accomplished. At the time I'm making this video, Chris Paul has played 1,361 games between the regular season and the playoffs. And yet, with that incredibly high volume, Paul never played a single game where he didn't record an assist. Every single game of his career, Paul has dished out at least 1 dime. Magic Johnson can't say that. Neither can John Stockton, Jason Kidd, Steve Nash, Isaiah Thomas, Oscar Robertson, or LeBron James. In fact, of the top 100 players with the most assists in NBA history, Chris Paul is the only player who never had a game with 0 assists. If that doesn't put him in the conversation of the greatest point guards of all time, then I don't know what will. Draymond Green is known for his fierce defense and for being an integral part of the Golden State Warriors dynasty, but unfortunately, he's also known for his antics on and off the court. Draymond is extremely close to being in the top 10 list for the most technical fouls in NBA history, as he currently sits at a total of 163. He started accumulating those T's immediately, and I mean immediately, in his basketball career. His first NBA basket came on November 14, 2012, against the Atlanta Hawks. Draymond buried an open 3 and immediately started taunting Zaza Pachulia, who began defending late. The refs then called Draymond for a technical foul. That's right, Draymond got a technical foul on his very first basket in the association, which honestly foreshadowed how his career would play out pretty well. Leading scorers don't win championships. No, this isn't an absolutely true statement, but it was a prominent narrative many years ago, and even to this day, it's actually pretty accurate quite often. Only 11 times has the league scoring champion gone on to win an NBA championship in the same season. What's stunning is that Michael Jordan did it 6 times, meaning that MJ accomplished the feat more than the rest of NBA history combined. Unsurprisingly, Michael Jordan is clearly the reason why no one talks about this narrative any longer. But maybe we still should, considering how it hasn't been done in over 2 decades, with the most recent one being Shaq in the 99 to 2000 season. Over the years, the game of basketball has seen massive inflation in the amount of three-point shots taken, but long ago, there was a small blip in time where the NBA was letting it fly. In the mid-90s, the league office was concerned with the fact that general scoring was progressively on the decline, so they attempted a solution. They shortened the three-point line from 23 feet 9 inches to 22 feet away from the basket. As expected, the amount of attempts and the efficiency dramatically increased. But 2 players specifically started launching the ball like never before: George McCloud of the Dallas Mavericks and Dennis Scott of the Orlando Magic. To this day, George McCloud still has the Mavericks record for the most three-pointers made in a season. It was the 95 to 96 season, and it was a total of 257. That's a total significantly higher than the fellow Mavericks totals of Luka Doncic, Jason Terry, Steve Nash, Vince Carter, and Dirk Nowitzki. He was averaging a tremendous 8.6 attempts per game. For perspective on just how much that was during that era, that same season, the entire New Jersey Nets team averaged 9.1 attempts per game. As amazing as McCloud's total was, it wasn't the best that season, as the sharpshooting Dennis Scott made 267 three-pointers that year, which is still the Orlando Magic's franchise record. The thing is, despite the increase in three-point volume, the scoring didn't increase league-wide with the shortened three-point line, as the league's issue was a much slower pace of play. So after 3 years of a shorter three-point line, the league put it back to its original position starting in the 97 to 98 season. How many three-pointers do you think players would be making today if they returned the line back to 22 feet? The Boston Celtics have arguably the most prestigious history of any basketball franchise, and have had many great scoring legends throughout their history, like John Havlicek, Larry Bird, and Paul Pierce, just to name a few. With that being said, Jason Tatum did something this year that's never been done by a Celtic before, by averaging at least 30 points over the course of the season. All that history of great scoring, yet this young star stands alone. If you felt like scoring was at a record high in this modern NBA, you would be correct. Since the NBA merger in 1976, this is the highest scoring season in NBA history, as teams have averaged 114.7 points per game. For perspective, teams were averaging over 23 points less during LeBron James's rookie season in 2003. The only comparable seasons are back when Wilt Chamberlain was still playing basketball, as teams were averaging 116.7 points per game in the 1969 to 1970 season. Why do you think there is this recent sudden spike in NBA scoring? Let me know in the comments below. There have been many great teams throughout the rich history of basketball, but 2 teams won more games than anyone else. The 95 to 96 72-10 Chicago Bulls, and the 15 to 16 73-9 Golden State Warriors. Only one player in NBA history played against both of those teams, and it was the all-time great power forward Kevin Garnett. In each of those cases, Garnett was a member of the Minnesota Timberwolves, and what will come as a surprise to absolutely no one, Garnett went 0-3 against those teams. In the last 24 years, 22 of the last 24 NBA Finals have been represented by either California or Texas. The 2023 playoffs are currently underway, and I can promise you one thing: Texas won't be representing the finals this time. This season, all 3 Texas teams missed the playoffs. This was the first time it had happened in NBA history. LeBron James has had quite a bit of playoff success throughout his career, but no fact may better prove that point than this one. In the last 40 years of basketball, LeBron James has won more playoff games than each of these NBA franchises. That's insanely impressive, but consider this. If you were to combine the win totals of the Timberwolves, Pelicans, Hornets, Wizards, and Grizzlies, LeBron would still be way ahead of the combined total of those teams. At this point, domination might as well be his middle name. There have been many great rim protectors in postseason history, and then, on a level of his own, there was Dikembe Mutombo in the 1994 playoffs. As a member of the Denver Nuggets, Mutombo was experiencing the prime of his career and was destroying records along the way. In the first round of the playoffs, his 8th-seeded Nuggets were taking on the dominant and highly favored first-seeded Supersonics. In a best-of-5 series, after falling to a 2-0 deficit, Mutombo helped lead his Nuggets back to win the next 3 games straight, to ultimately defeat the Supersonics and achieve one of the greatest upsets of basketball history. Over the course of that series, Mutombo averaged an insane 6.2 blocks per game, which is the highest average for a playoff series that the league has ever seen. It wasn't just a flash in the pan either. In the very next series against the favored Utah Jazz, Mutombo helped push the Jazz to 7 games, as he averaged 5.4 blocks over that hard-fought series. That's the highest average in a 7-game series that the league has ever seen, meaning he broke records in back-to-back playoff rounds. Not only that, but in both of those playoff series, Mutombo averaged more blocks than the entire opposing team combined. To simply say that he was an all-time great defensive anchor would be selling him tremendously short. The 2021-22 Lakers had a disappointing season to say the least, but beyond that, believe it or not, there's actually facts that at least present a case of how this team is the most disappointing team of all time. According to the preseason odds, the Lakers were projected to win 52.5 games over the course of the regular season. At the time I'm writing this script, it is impossible for Los Angeles to finish with more than 33 wins. Regardless of the exact number of wins, they'll have the greatest deficit from the preseason odds that the league has ever seen. As I've mentioned in past videos, I expected this team to be disappointing, but not this disappointing. Speaking of the terrible 2022 Lakers, at the time I'm writing this, they just recently wrapped up an 8-game losing streak. They were dangerously close to setting a new record for the worst losing streak in franchise history. The current record is a pair of 10-game losing streaks. The first came from the 93-94 Lakers, whose best player was arguably Vlade Divac. The other was in the 15-16 season, which was Kobe's farewell year, which was pretty brutal up until the final game of that regular season. The thing that's most stunning about that 2022 Lakers team is that they're easily more talented on paper than the other 2 Lakers squads. When it comes to the Defensive Player of the Year award, there have been many snubs and near misses throughout the years. For example, Tim Duncan and Scottie Pippen are widely recognized as 2 of the greatest defenders to ever live, yet neither of them ever won a single Defensive Player of the Year award. But with that being said, there may have been no one who was closer to winning the award than the Spurs defender Bruce Bowen. In 3 years straight, from 2005 to 2007, Bruce Bowen was the runner-up for the Defensive Player of the Year award. Furthermore, in 5 straight years, from 2004 to 2008, Bowen finished as a top 4 player in the Defensive Player of the Year race. Maybe the craziest fact is that in the entirety of the 2000s, no player other than Ben Wallace got more Defensive Player of the Year votes than Bruce Bowen. Not Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, Shaq, Metta World Peace, or Marcus Camby. Bowen got more votes than all of them. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in a parallel universe, Scottie Pippen was a Seattle Supersonic. Why do I say this? It's because of the fact that Scottie nearly put on a Seattle jersey not once, but twice. The first instance was on his draft day when he was selected with the 5th overall pick by the Sonics before the Chicago Bulls acquired him in a trade for Olden Polynice. The second instance isn't as widely known, but it came in 1994, when Pippen was in the middle of drama with the Bulls front office. The near deal to the Sonics was a trade for the dynamic Shawn Kemp. Of course, a Michael Jordan and Shawn Kemp tandem is interesting to think about, but also a pairing of Gary Payton and Scottie Pippen may have given Seattle the greatest perimeter defense in NBA history. Back in the 90s, Grant Hill was truly on his way to becoming an all-time great, before his ankle injuries began to derail his career. He was athletically gifted and had skills that had an impact on numerous aspects of the game. After his first 6 seasons in the NBA, he had accumulated a total of 9,393 points, 3,417 rebounds, and 2,720 assists. In the history of the league, only 3 players have eclipsed those numbers in their first 6 seasons, and they were Oscar Robertson, Larry Bird, and LeBron James. If that doesn't give you an idea of the potential we saw in Hill back in the 90s, then probably nothing will. Back in the 80s, one of the greatest forces around the rim was a man by the name of Daryl Dawkins. He had one of the best nicknames in basketball, as the man was frequently referred to as Chocolate Thunder. The nickname was extremely fitting, considering how Dawkins was known for his thunderous slams, and had shattered the backboard on multiple occasions. One of the things that people rarely know about Dawkins, though, is that he played a very physical style of basketball and had a tendency to get into foul trouble. This wasn't just a minor issue, but in reality, he was one of the most foul-happy players in NBA history. In the 82-83 season, as a member of the New Jersey Nets, Dawkins set the NBA record for the most personal fouls in a season, as he accumulated a total of 379. You'd think he'd learn his lesson throughout that year. The very next season, Dawkins broke his own record, with a total of 386 fouls throughout the 83-84 season. That's an average of nearly 5 fouls per game. Kinda makes you think that maybe there was just a bit too much thunder from him that season. There have been many high flyers who have amazed audiences on All-Star weekends, but since the creation of the NBA dunk contest, only 2 teammates have won the award in consecutive years. Any guesses on who those 2 players are? It was 2 sensations from the 1980s, Dominique Wilkins in 1985 and Spud Webb in 1986, who played as teammates for the Atlanta Hawks. In most sports, it's very rare for a superstar player to be selected outside of the first round of the draft, but it is especially rare in the NBA. Case in point, only 2 second-round picks have ever gone to win the MVP award, and that was Willis Reed in 1970 and Nikola Jokic in 2021. Assuming the Joker actually wins his second MVP this season, he'll become the first second-round player to win multiple MVP awards. Last year, Giannis, also known as the Greek Freak, had one of the all-time great NBA Finals series, as he dominated on the court in numerous ways. One of those aspects was his elite scoring, as he had 3 separate performances in the NBA Finals where he scored at least 40 points. To give you some perspective on just how rare and impressive that is, consider this. Giannis now has as many 40-point games in the NBA Finals as Larry Bird, Kevin Durant, and Kobe Bryant do combined. Turning the ball over is a part of the game, and in many instances, it's the greatest facilitators who actually average the most turnovers, because they're the players who take the greatest risks while running the offense. With that being said, there are a few exceptions, and the biggest one is DeMarcus Cousins. He's famous for getting a lot of technical fouls, but that's not the only way he's been known to hurt his team. Among centers, DeMarcus Cousins has the highest career turnovers per game average in NBA history at 3.3. Despite not being the floor general, he still has a higher career turnover per game average than risky passers like Steve Nash and Jason Kidd. Michael Jordan famously set the NBA Finals record for the most three-pointers made in a game when he hit a total of 6 against the Blazers in 1992, which was followed up with his iconic shrug. Obviously, with the inflation of the three-point shot, the record has been broken numerous times since then. But what many of you may have not known is that this performance isn't even the Bulls franchise record for the most three-pointers made in an NBA Finals game. That was actually eclipsed just several years later by his longtime teammate Scottie Pippen. This performance from Scottie is massively overlooked, probably because it was Scottie instead of Michael, but also because it was one of the Bulls' 2 losing efforts in those finals, which certainly limits its ability to be positively remembered. Regardless, it's worth recognizing one of the few records that Scottie has over Michael. Speaking of Michael Jordan and the NBA Finals, MJ is often praised for his undefeated 6-0 record in the NBA Finals. But believe it or not, that's actually not the greatest undefeated Finals record in NBA history. That feat is actually held by a pair of Celtics legends, and no, neither of them are Bill Russell. The greatest undefeated Finals record is held by Tom Sanders and John Havlicek with a perfect 8-0 record. In the case of Sanders, he was a quality role-playing forward, who was in the right place at the right time. while Havlicek was a legitimate superstar who was truly one of the more underappreciated legends of basketball lore. And honestly, he probably would have taken a couple finals MVPs from Bill Russell if they had existed throughout his career. Bruce Bowen was a solid role player for the San Antonio Spurs dynasty and was most famously known for his elite perimeter defense. But along with that, he had some other unique and, dare I say, perplexing qualities. For example, his 02-03 season, where he played all 82 games and where his Spurs eventually went on to win the NBA championship. During that regular season, Bowen was the most efficient three-point shooter in the entire league, hitting a remarkable 44.1% from three-point distance. Yet somehow, simultaneously, he was also the worst free throw shooter in the entire league, shooting a pathetic 40.4% from the charity stripe. That's right, Bowen was the best in the game from 20 plus feet out, yet was the worst from 15 feet away while being unguarded. Go figure. When it comes to the greatest facilitators of all time, there was arguably no one better than Magic Johnson and John Stockton, who stand at the number 1 and number 2 spot for the most 20-plus assist games in NBA history. The rest of the top 10 list is all-time great point guards like Rajon Rondo, Isaiah Thomas, Russell Westbrook, Steve Nash, Kevin Johnson, Deron Williams, Chris Paul, and the all-time record holder for assists in a single game, Scott Skiles. But here's what's crazy. Magic Johnson and John Stockton combined have more 20 assist games than the rest of the top 10 list all put together. And if we're looking at only playoff games, Magic Johnson by himself has as many 20 assist games as the total of all other players of NBA history combined. That, among many other reasons, is why most people consider Magic as the greatest point guard of all time. Since the beginning of the NBA, there have been a total of 78 individual performances of at least 60 points. With that being said, one team has allowed more of these historic evenings than any other franchise, and I really can't say that I'm surprised by this fact. The New York Knicks have allowed an opposing player to score at least 60 points a total of 10 times, and famously, one of them was 100 points. The teams tied for second are the Hawks and the Lakers, allowing a total of 8 each. Steph Curry is one of the greatest basketball players to ever live. At this point in his career, I think just about anyone can admit that. But at his very peak, did you know that Steph Curry was the most efficient player in NBA history? Well, at least from a certain perspective. In the 2015-16 season, Steph Curry was named the NBA's first unanimous MVP winner, and deservedly so, as he eclipsed 50-40-90 percentages on the season, while making 402 three-pointers and while leading his Warriors to a record-breaking 73-9 season. Here's the stat that most people miss though. Of seasons where players averaged at least 30 points per game, Steph Curry's 2015-2016 season had the highest true shooting percentage in NBA history. When it comes to scoring, it really doesn't get more efficient than that. In the middle of 2007, Kobe Bryant was very unhappy with the Lakers organization. He had just played the last few seasons with starting support like Smush Parker, Luke Walton, and Chris Mim. It was enough to make just about any superstar go crazy, and it resulted in the Mamba demanding a trade to another team. There was a lot of negotiations during that time, but easily the most notable one was when the Lakers offered Kobe to Cleveland in exchange for LeBron James. The Cavaliers quickly said no to that offer, but then said that they would give a package containing anyone else on the team in exchange for Kobe. The Lakers then said no to that counter offer. Whether it was Kobe Bryant and LeBron James switching teams, or Kobe and LeBron lining up as teammates in Cleveland, it's pretty crazy to think about the impact this could have had on basketball history. Although, before you dream too much about a super team pairing of LeBron and Kobe in Cleveland, Kobe did later state in an interview that he would have used his no-trade clause to veto a move to Cleveland. Apparently, even the proposal of having LeBron James as a teammate in place of Luke Walton wasn't enough to appeal the Mamba to live in Cleveland. Michael Jordan and the Bulls dominated the 90s, we all know this. But overall, Michael Jordan has an equal or winning record against every other MVP player of the 1990s, with the exception of one. Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. In Jordan's total of 23 games against Olajuwon, Michael Jordan's team won 10 times, and Olajuwon's team won 13 times. This is an interesting fact that only adds to the what-if debate. If Jordan never retired to play baseball and instead the Rockets and Bulls met in the 1994 NBA Finals, let me know in the comments section which team you think would have won in that hypothetical matchup. PER stands for Player Efficiency Rating. It's an advanced stat that's intended to factor in just about every value on the court in order to give a player a grade of his overall value. Some people like this stat, while others think it underemphasizes or overemphasizes certain aspects. With that being said, most players on the NBA's recent 75 Greatest Players list had a very high player efficiency rating. Of inactive NBA players, a man named Neil Johnston has the highest career PER of anyone who didn't make the 75 Greatest list. Not only that, but among all players, Johnston has the 11th highest player efficiency rating of all time, at 24.7 over the course of his career. That's an even higher career rating than guys like Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, Kareem, and Tim Duncan. He's a 6'8" center who won the NBA championship in 1956. He was also a 6-time All-Star, a 3-time scoring champion, the 1955 rebounding champion, and he led the league in field goal percentage 3 times. With a resume like this, it's quite surprising that he didn't make it into the top 75. Many players have won the league MVP throughout the years, but one man was so impactful all around the court that he was able to win the award while averaging only 13.8 points per game, securing the title as the lowest scoring MVP of all time. Any guesses on who this MVP was? It's the NBA champion and the all-time great rebounder Wes Unseld, who won the award in 1969. On this channel, I've talked about many basketball legends who were ahead of their time, but one sharpshooter fits that description better than any other. His name is Louis Laimbeer. He was a 6-foot point guard who played in the ABA and NBA from 1967 to 1979. Before the three-point line was introduced to the NBA in 1979, it existed in the 60s for the ABA, and Louis took full advantage. He wasn't just an accurate shooter, but a volume one as well, as he was consistently pulling up from three-point distance in transition decades before modern guards popularized it. Specifically, in the 68-69 season, he shot 7.1 three-point attempts per game. It took several decades for another player to average that many attempts in a season. In fact, the average NBA team wasn't averaging as many three-point attempts as Louis did by himself for the first 12 seasons of the NBA having the three-point line. Plus, he's also the ABA's all-time leading scorer, so that's pretty cool too. He's definitely an underappreciated gem of basketball lore. It's not very often that I say anything critical about Wilt's 1962 season. That was the year that he averaged 50 points and 25 rebounds while putting up his historic performances like his 100-point game. With that being said, if there was a man who had an answer for Wilt Chamberlain that season, it was his rival, Bill Russell. Wilt's lowest scoring game that year came against Bill and the Celtics, and his second lowest game, and his third, and his fourth. In all 4 of those games, Wilt shot well below his average efficiency, and his team lost by an average of 25.2 points per game. This is one of the numerous reasons why many people still call Bill Russell the greatest defender to ever live. Right behind John Havlicek is Paul Pierce for the most points ever scored by a Boston Celtic. Pierce was known as the Truth and could score a ton of buckets in a small amount of time. With his lethal shooting, Pierce made a name for himself in the NBA playoffs with his many high-scoring affairs. With that being said, remarkably, Bill Russell has more games in the playoffs with at least 30 rebounds than Paul Pierce does with at least 30 points. Bill Russell was a winner, we all know this, but he wasn't simply a winner based on his luck and circumstances. The main reason he was so successful is because he was arguably the most clutch basketball player to ever live. Russell played in a total of 10 deciding Game 7s throughout the course of his career, and he never lost a single one of them. He was leaned upon heavily in those games as he played 488 out of a possible 495 minutes. If Bill isn't dominating without taking almost any rest, then they likely lose some of those Game 7s, as 6 out of those 10 games were decided by only one possession. The reality was that if Russell had an off night in any one of those Game 7s, then he's losing a championship ring because of it. But instead, we now remember him as the legend who has more rings than fingers. Nikola Jokic and Wilt Chamberlain are often recognized as the greatest passing big men of NBA history, which is warranted, but often overlooked in that aspect is Bill Russell, whose court vision and unselfish nature allowed him to be one of the all-time great givers as well. Russell actually has the 3rd highest career assists per game average among centers in NBA history, reaching as high as 5.8 in 1967. Bill had many modern players that he developed a close relationship with, and he had a high level of respect for many of those players. But there was only one player who Russell referred to as his absolute favorite, and that was the San Antonio Spurs legend, Tim Duncan. The statement from Bill came from a discussion with Duncan many years ago, and he equated his fondness to their similarities and the fact that Duncan played hard, played smart, and won championships. It makes sense given how similar these superstars were in their approach to the game and their quiet lead by example type style. Jason Kidd is an NBA Hall of Famer and is simply one of the greatest facilitators of basketball history. With that being said, even the great ones can have some not-so-great records. On November 17, 2000, in a matchup against the New York Knicks, Jason Kidd achieved the wrong kind of a quadruple-double, as he got 18 points, 12 rebounds, 10 assists, and 14 turnovers in a 5-point loss to New York. His 14 turnovers are officially the most by a single player in NBA history. The entire Knicks team had an equal amount of turnovers to Jason Kidd alone. Regardless, it didn't stop people from eventually referring to him as the best point guard in the game. There's players who looked for their own shot, and then, on a level completely on his own, there is Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt holds the NBA record for the most field goals attempted in a single game, which was 63 shots when he scored 100 points in 1962. Stunningly, Wilt holds the top 6 spots on the all-time list, with 3 of those games having at least 60 shot attempts. Of the top 50 spots on the all-time list, Wilt all by himself owns 33 of those spots. Love him or hate him, if you look up the definition of a ball hog, you'll find a picture of Wilt Chamberlain. Only 9 times in NBA history has a player won the MVP award while averaging less than 20 points per game, and this was done by 4 different players. I'll give you a moment. How many of these 4 players can you guess? Feel free to pause the video for more time to think. They were Wes Unseld, Bill Walton, Steve Nash, and the legendary Bill Russell. What's incredible is that Bill Russell has more than half of these MVP awards, as he won the trophy 5 times while averaging less than 20 points per game, which truly speaks to the impact of his all-around game. There have been many incredibly high-scoring performances throughout the history of the game, like Wilt Chamberlain's 100 points in 1962 and Kobe Bryant's 81 points in 2006. But the highest scoring performances are usually done by players who were selected to an NBA All-Star team that season. So with that being said, what is the highest scoring performance of all time by a player who was not selected as an NBA All-Star that season? It was actually the Suns' currently active shooting guard Devin Booker, who dropped 70 points on the Boston Celtics in 2017. 13 players in NBA history have won back-to-back MVP awards, which is a remarkable feat and worth appreciating each and every one of these players. With that being said, only one of these players have won back-to-back MVP awards on 2 separate teams. Any guesses on who that player is? It was the all-time great center and the extremely underappreciated Moses Malone, who won the award as a member of the Rockets in 1982 and as a member of the 76ers in 1983. In most NBA seasons up until 1984, the first round of the NBA playoffs were decided in a best-of-3 series. In 1984, it was changed to a best-of-5 format, and then in 2003, the NBA figured out that they really like money, and they changed it again, this time from a best-of-5 format to a best-of-7. These changes obviously had massive implications on basketball history as we know it. Need an example? Well, how about this? The 2014 Spurs are recognized as one of the greatest basketball teams of all time, as they won the championship that season. The 1995 Houston Rockets had one of the most impressive title runs that the league has ever seen, as Hakeem Olajuwon earned his second straight championship ring. Here's the thing, if the NBA never changed its best-of-3 format, both of these championship teams would have instead been eliminated in the first round. Scoring 40 points in a game is extremely hard to do. Averaging 40 points over the course of an NBA playoff series is even harder. And even harder than that is averaging over 40 points per game on the game's biggest stage, the NBA Finals. Only 3 players in NBA history have averaged over 40 points per game over the course of an NBA Finals series. Can you name some of them? They were Michael Jordan in 1993, Rick Barry in 1967, and Elgin Baylor in 1962. With that being said, Michael Jordan's team is the only one that won the championship. Harvey Pollock is a Basketball Hall of Famer and worked as an NBA statistician for 69 years that spanned from the birth of the league until his death in 2015. One of the many remarkable things about Harvey is that he was tracking many stats unofficially way before the NBA started officially tracking them. One of those statistics were steals, which the NBA didn't start officially tracking until 1973. According to Harvey, on April 11, 1965, Bill Russell accumulated a total of 12 points, 28 rebounds, 7 assists, and 12 steals. Just so you know, the official NBA record for steals in a game is 11 by Kendall Gill. A center isn't anywhere near the top of that list. But if Harvey's stat keeping is in fact accurate, then Bill Russell should hold the record for the most steals in a single game, which is an achievement he accomplished going up against the great Wilt Chamberlain, just to add the cherry on top. Many different teams have won the NBA championship throughout the years, but usually those teams are stacked with players who earned an all-star selection. Only 2 teams in NBA history have won the championship while having no all-stars on their roster. Can you guess either of those teams? I'll give you a major hint. It's a trick question for both of those teams. The 2 championship teams with no all-stars are the 1949 to 1950 Lakers, due to the fact that the NBA All-Star Game wasn't a thing until 1951, and the other team was the 98 to 99 San Antonio Spurs, which was due to the fact that there was no All-Star Game that season because of the lockout. Therefore, none of the players in the league were technically all-stars that season. I think the lesson here is, if your team consists of only role players, it's basically impossible for you to win the championship. Game 5 of the 1984 NBA Finals between the Celtics and Lakers was one of the hottest games of basketball history. And when I say hot, I'm not talking about the quality of basketball on the court. No, I'm saying that it was literally super freaking hot in that building. It was in the middle of a Boston summer, and the Boston Garden air conditioning system wasn't working, which resulted in the building reaching 97 degrees, which is 36.1 Celsius. Due to this game is famously referred to as the Heat game. Players were exhausted all over the court, and an aging Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had to be given an oxygen tank. NBA referee Hugh Evans actually passed out in the first half and had to be replaced with a backup referee. As grueling as it was, both teams managed to get through it, as the Celtics ultimately won the game 121 to 103. Many players have had epic scoring performances throughout the years, but usually those players aren't disqualified from the game with time left on the clock. The highest scoring performance in NBA history where the player fouled out was by Pistol Pete Maravich when he dropped a monstrous 68 points on 60% shooting against the New York Knicks in 1977. He actually received his last foul with only moments left in the fourth quarter as he charged through another player while attempting to score his 70th point. Second on the list of the highest scoring games while fouling out was Kobe with 58 in 2006 and DeMarcus Cousins with 56 in 2016. The late great Paul Westphal was an NBA Hall of Fame basketball player, but he was also a damn good head coach. Westphal was the head coach of the title-contending Phoenix Suns in 1993, who were led by the league MVP Charles Barkley. Unfortunately, Phoenix found themselves in a dogfight in the first round of the 1993 playoffs, and a scrappy Lakers team caught them completely off guard by stealing the first 2 games in Phoenix. It was a best-of-5 series, and facing elimination in an 0-2 hole, Paul Westphal made one of the boldest predictions of basketball history. Take a listen.
We're down 0-2, and I know the next question is, are you guys dead? No, we're going to win the series. We're going to win one Tuesday, and the next game's Thursday, we'll win there, then we'll come back and we'll win the series on Sunday. And everybody will say what a great series it was.
This statement turned out to be the boost of confidence that his team needed, as the Suns went on to win Game 3, Game 4, and Game 5 as they closed out the series. And to this day, just as Westphal predicted, people talk about how great a series it was. Up until 2013, no player had ever recorded a triple-double in his first career start. Not Oscar Robertson, Magic Johnson, Russell Westbrook, or anyone else for that matter. But on November 13th, 2013, the Philadelphia 76ers point guard Tony Wroten was ready to change that. In a 6-point victory over the Houston Rockets, Tony dropped 18 points, 10 rebounds, and 11 assists on 39% shooting, becoming the first player in NBA history to record a triple-double in his first career start. For those of you who don't know who this guy is, he actually had a pretty nice trajectory to his career. But unfortunately, he tore his ACL in 2015 and played his final game in the NBA in 2016 at the young age of 22. He's been playing basketball overseas ever since. For those of you who actually made it through this massive video, I commend you and thank you for supporting my channel as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.